Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for joining today's webinar. And I know it's good morning for some of you. Just wanted to do a couple of quick introductions before we get started. So my name is Tom Platt. I kind of head up product sales here at Intechnica, and I work with a range of our customers. Some in the media sector have quite a bit of sort of analysis of what's been going on and what some of our clients have been seeing that we're going to cover today. I'm very fortunate to be joined by our CTO, co-founder, speaker and published author, Andy Still. Andy Still is going to be sort of carrying on the sort of final part of today's webinar, talking a lot about what we're seeing in the industry and going through some exclusive stats that we've got for everyone today. Just before we get into things, I just sort of wanted to cover off what we're going to talk about. I guess the first point today before we get started, we're going to be covering a lot of issues in today's webinar. We expect the content to take around 45 minutes to get through, and we are going to leave time for a Q&A session at the end. So if anyone does have any questions at any point in this, I know we're going to be covering a sort of wide range of topics, and please feel free to put them into the question box. You can see that panel on the side. So yeah, if anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in. We'll be covering all those questions at the end, and we'll make sure we leave some time for that. In terms of what we're going to go over today, obviously we've just done introductions. I'm going to do a very sort of quick bit in terms of background, sort of why we're in the space and what we've been seeing. Then we're going to discuss what is NHT, and by NHT we mean what is non-human traffic, what are bots, what are they doing. We're going to discuss the impact of them generally in the sort of wider sort of different industries and also in digital publishing and media, before we move to some real data and analysis that we've found from a sort of cross-section of clients, some of who are in the media space, and so what we're actually seeing out there on client sites in the media space. So we're going to be covering that as well. Finally, we're just going to cover off some of the solutions that are available out there for everyone in the marketplace, some of the approaches people can take, and also we're going to sort of obviously just end on that Q&A session as well. Yeah. All right. Thanks. As I said, I think everyone should be in mute, but if there is anyone that's unmuted, please could you mute your lines? Yeah, done that. Great. And so we'll get started. So just to give you a little bit of background, I'll do this really quickly. Intechnica as a business has been around for 10 years. We were very fortunate enough to launch what it was and still is one of the industry-leading queuing solutions, which was out there to help websites protect them from sort of major spikes in traffic. And we ran that across some of the world's largest sites in various different locations, and we've been doing that successfully for over 3 years now. I think one of the things we found sort of a year on into our product sort of life cycle was that the requests we were seeing on people's websites didn't always really marry up with what we were seeing in terms of the back end. So we sort of started to see a discrepancy in what people were predicting their websites were going to have and what was actually happening on the websites. And that led us down to this path of investigating. Actually, we started to see a real rise, not just in digital publishing, but across travel, retail, ticketing, and various other industries, a real rise of non-human traffic. Off the back of that, we've developed a solution. We're not going to cover that today, but I thought it was interesting just to sort of let you know that obviously we've been around for a while now. We have a real wealth of data across a range of different clients, a range of different sectors in different countries, and we've really noticed this sort of problem of non-human traffic creep up, and it's one thing that we've spotted for our solution. So that's why we have the data we have and why this is an interesting topic for us. So with that short little bit over, I sort of just wanted to talk about what we're seeing in the industry and the real sort of background to this. And obviously, I think what we've seen in the digital publishing industry, the media industry over the past sort of 10, 20, 30 years has been a real shift change. This started in the 1970s with the start of Project Gothenburg, where there was an original project to make a digital version of the Declaration of Independence. Then we started to see in sort of the mid to late 1980s digital publishers start to experiment with various different methods of distribution when CD-ROMs were established, and then, sort of towards 1994, real sort of step change for the industry. There was the first blog created, links.net. which obviously spawned a whole sort of new culture of content and people getting it. We saw another big change in 1998 with the launch of Google. It did take them some time, from that launch date to become so prevalent, and it was in 2001 when they became the sort of leading CDN, which of course has changed the way we sort of go out and search for content, impacting everyone in the industry. Moving on from that, obviously we saw the launch of RSS feeds with Netscape.com. That's made a real big difference in terms of how people gather and capture content. The 2000s as well, things like e-paper. We obviously saw the launch of social media. Google launched Google News and their first click flurry in 2006. And then we've seen the launch of the iPhone in 2007. Which obviously has had a real big difference coming up to the 10-year anniversary of the iPhone, which stemmed sort of to the real change in devices and what people were viewing news on. So obviously from the iPhone, we then had the tablets, the wearables, and a real sort of change in technology as well in the way people view news. Moving on to sort of more recently, we've seen mobile become the number one sort of platform in the way that sort of consumers get sort of news and digital content. We've also obviously seen the rise of fake news. It's been around for a long time. It's been around sort of for decades now. But with the sort of compounding sort of impact of social media, the availability of internet and the different platforms that are out there, we've really seen a rise in fake news. And we've also started to see the first election sort of really be influenced by the power of social media. So a real sort of general history with loads of different bits in there. I think why is this of interest to us? Why is it interesting? I think what we're seeing here is a real difference in the way we publish our content and how we give it to consumers. We're seeing a real difference in things like the launch of the first paywall and how we make our revenue in the digital publishing and media industry. And also this change has had a real impact on the sort of traffic we're seeing on our websites. Obviously, the launch of things like social media, RSS feeds, and the iPhone is really changing that traffic that's hitting our websites, which was historically just someone on a computer, on a browser, to now it could be social media getting prefetched data, it could be Google scraping you for SEO rank, or it could be people hitting you from multiple devices or getting content through RSS feeds. So a real big change in the way sort of people are interacting, pushing content out, and the way people are interacting with that content, which we've seen has had a profound impact in terms of the different traffic that websites are seeing. This has been both good and bad. We'll talk a bit more in breadth about what we've seen in terms of the impact, but in terms of what, obviously the press and legal, what's been happening. In 2013, we saw the Associated Press won a major victory against a Scandinavian firm for scraping their data. We've seen Fox News more recently in 2016 take actions against people sort of scraping their content. Craigslist have been very prominent in taking legal action against scrapers. More recently winning sort of 40, 60 million pound judgments against people who were taking their content and scraping it. Of course, it's not just all about scraping as well. We've seen a real mass and a real sort of convergence to this problem of ad fraud as well. So there's quite a few different problems tackling the digital media and publishing industry at the moment, stemming from bots, whether that be ad fraud or just general scraping and republishing of content. We're going to try and cover all of these today, but I think that the real point we're trying to get at is, there are a lot of sort of court victories being won, a lot of people doing stuff on the legal front against this, but for those that aren't, potentially have the budget or the time to take on sort of major court cases, we're going to cover a couple of things that we're seeing and ways that you can handle this moving forward. So I'm just covering off very quickly sort of, we're talking about bots here. What do we mean by bots? Obviously the title of the webinar, Rise of the Robo Reader. These bots can be any one of many things. We're seeing loads of different things out there, and I think this represents the key challenge for people at the moment, is that some of these bots are your absolute key traffic. They're your feed fetchers, they're your content syndicators, they're your SEO rank checkers, they're the things that get your content out there for people to read and to find. So they're some of the most important hits you're going to get, but also they're some of the most dangerous. We've got things like DDoS attacks, we've got people trying to scrape content, people trying to hijack accounts, and all number of different things going out. And what we're finding, it's very difficult as this sort of list of things and non-human activity increases, is to be able to identify what's going on and make a decision about how we manage it. So without further ado, just hopefully that's a little bit of a scene set for everyone and a bit of background about where we're coming from. I'm now going to pass over to my colleague and our CTO co-founder, Andy Still, who's going to talk in a lot more depth about exactly what is non-human traffic. Then he's going to cover some impacts of it and what we're seeing out there in the industry.
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, as Tom was saying, what is non-human traffic? It can be any request that's not directly triggered by a human. And as we, the way that we're situated with our Traffic Defender product is that we sit in front of a lot of sites and we see all the traffic that's coming into those sites, and that comes in from a range of different sources and for a range of different experiences. And as we can see, it's very difficult to extract from that exactly what that traffic is up to. As Tom was saying, it's easy to think of non-human traffic as being good or bad. There certainly are good areas of non-human traffic that you absolutely will not want to get rid of. I can't imagine any business wanting to get rid of what the search engines are doing. That's generally their main way out into the market, and certainly monitoring tools and things like that are absolutely essential to the running of businesses. At the other end of the scale, we've got hackers there who are actively looking to exploit problems with your system, and we've got fairly straightforward things like content theft and ad fraud, which are clearly not something that people would want on their systems. But there's also quite a large grey area in the middle, which is where we look at things like price scrapers, content aggregators, and content harvesters, which, they are semi-legitimate. They could be very beneficial to your business. They could be something you absolutely want to work with, but equally they could be people who you don't want to work with, that having a negative impact. Or what's quite likely is that they could be having some negative and some positive impact. So just to take that to the next step, I think it's quite important to consider that obviously all non-human traffic has an element of human interaction at some point. There is no traffic that is just out there being completely generated without a human triggering it in some way. So it's just the level of human interaction that will vary, and it's important to consider around whether this makes it easier or harder to detect, and whether it's, again, traffic that you want or don't want. But what we generally look at as you get from higher human input to low human input is down to how targeted the attack is. So, for example, on the left, you would have Alexa or other chatbot type applications, which would be interacting generally with a single human to do a specific task. Again, when it reaches the other end, it may look like non-human traffic. Getting through to the very other end of the spectrum, which is when we start looking at just bots that are out there, just looking for general known vulnerabilities in systems that they know how to exploit, that then can be flagged up, to exploit in more detail. And in the middle of that, you've got a range. So you may get fairly targeted attacks, just targeting specific forums where we know spam will be received in the manner that will get benefit that those human interactions are looking for. At the other end, you may just get very general scraping of the internet. That may be content across a very wide range of news sites that is being aggregated in another way. So I think as we keep saying, in this situation, managing non-human traffic is very difficult, because the intentions of non-human traffic will vary dramatically, and the impact of that will vary dramatically from industry to industry and between different businesses in the same industry, depending on their business model. So with that in mind, we've come up with a fairly simple methodology for assessing non-human traffic passing through your system. We usually recommend a two-stage process to look at this problem. The first stage is about analysing your web traffic to understand the nature and the activity of what that traffic is doing. Once you've got that understanding of what your traffic's made up of, then you can start assessing how you can best manage that. And it's really important when you decide in what action to take that you look at ways that you can maximize the value you get from that non-human traffic while minimizing the impact. It's also important to realize that non-human traffic can deliver value whilst also having a negative impact on your business. In that case, you just need to assess the relative importance of non-human and human traffic to determine the relative, which one outweighs the other. When you're considering the impact, it's also important that you consider the range of impacts that it could be having on your system. I mean, the first one is, what impact is it having on other users? Is it negatively affecting the experience of your other human users? That could be in terms of the quality of service that they're getting. That could be non-availability of products due to human purchase or due to non-human purchase. So if they're going on specifically wanting something from your site, which is now no longer available because of non-human activity, those users will have a negative perception of your service. It could be the performance. So it could be that your system is running very, very slow because of the amount of traffic that you're serving from non-human users. You need to look at the impact on your company interests. So is non-human traffic accessing your site for the purpose that you wouldn't generally want for your company? Content theft is an obvious one there. It could be competitors gathering your data and using it in their own systems. And the next one's fairly sort of obvious. Is look at the impact on system security. Is it trying to exploit weaknesses in your system? If it is, then you absolutely want to do something about that. And lastly, it's worth considering the impact on your infrastructure. So is it affecting the performance of your infrastructure? Are your servers reaching capacity, servicing this traffic? Are you hitting scalability issues? Are you running low on disk space? You're running low on cache space? Is the data space storage running out just because you're serving non-human traffic? And the knock-on impact of that is, what's the impact on costs? The obvious one is increased bandwidth costs and storage costs, but it could be that you're actually running additional infrastructure just to serve non-human traffic. Are you gaining any benefit from, as a company, on the back of that additional spend? Okay, so let's hand back over to Tom now to quickly talk through some of the impacts.
Yeah, sure. So I think we talked very sort of generally about non-human traffic there, what it's doing. Andy's gone into a bit more depth. I just wanted to sort of cover off some of the impacts that we're seeing. Obviously, we've got the OWASP sort of threat here. The number one kind of thing we're seeing a lot at the moment is spam. So spam traffic is this, this can take many different forms. It can be in the form of people just posting links, content, and general spam. It could be form spam. It could be people spamming registrations. Key thing about this is any of this real spam that's taking place, there isn't really any benefit to the business from this that we can see, certainly. So, it's certainly something that should be sort of really avoided and potentially blocked. Obviously, we don't need the spam clogging up the site. We don't need it damaging the content on our actual pages, and it's just not something we need there. Things like bad links and stuff should always be avoided. So that's one we can certainly try and block out. When we look at other ones, we've obviously got ad fraud, which I think is a key one, obviously identified here in the OWASP threat. Andy, I think you had a couple of comments on ad fraud.
Yeah, I mean, ad fraud is probably, when we're looking in this area, is probably one of the highest damaging ones to people's businesses. Not worse because there's a direct financial impact on this. And ad fraud's an interesting one in that it affects both sides of the equation. So both advertisers and publishers negatively get impacted from this. And I think it's, we're looking at the massive drop-off in conversions for the amount of money that people are spending on advertising. We're looking at very inconsistent responses to ads in different situations. You do need to be aware of that. In that case, there's probably ad fraud going on. The inaccuracies that you're seeing in metrics and analytics on the back of that. And obviously, from both sides, the revenue pool and the ad spend is being shared between legitimate users and people who are perpetrating the ad fraud. So it's an incredibly costly business to the industry, and I think it's worth considering that the fraud that goes on is fairly sophisticated in the nature that that is undertaken to deliver this. This can be a range of people creating bespoke systems just for fraudulently executing pay-per-click adverts, and much wider range of different fraud methodologies out there. So it is really not a simple problem to address.
Yeah, and certainly some real world impacts we've seen sort of firsthand with that is working with various different organizations who publish content and make a lot of their revenue and bottom line numbers from advertising. They're certainly seeing their partners who advertise on their site typically wanting a discount based on what they suspect to be a certain amount of non-human traffic, which very often is sort of just a finger in the air estimate. And one thing we're working with people a lot with is to say, if you've got an advertising partner who's coming saying we want a 20% discount off all those impressions because we're pretty certain 20% went to non-human traffic. I think one thing we're working with a lot of people on is, is that figure actually 20%? Are people potentially giving too much away in terms of the revenue? And really trying to sit in between the two partners as an independent sort of person who can say, actually, here's the proof. Here's how many of the adverts are actually being served to non-human people. Can we block it? If we can, here's what's blocking it. And really just trying to help sort of bring some clarity into that mix there in terms of making it very fair and transparent for both the people sort of selling the adverts and the people paying for that. They're actually getting the right money and the adverts are being shown to the right people. And if they're not, being very clear about what the impact of that is, and really trying to help people sort of clean up their sites and the traffic in there. Really sort of give some more credibility back is the goal there. So we've seen that firsthand. I think moving on then to content scrapers, these are certainly an interesting one.
Yeah, and I think when we're looking at, particularly in the publishing industry, where your content really is the lifeblood of the value that you produce, as soon as that is then used in an area that's outside your control, that is obviously a serious concern to anyone in that situation. And to some extent, this is fairly obvious with people coming along, stealing content and using it in their own systems and gaining benefit from that. Where this becomes sort of slightly more interesting is when we start looking at data aggregators. And data aggregators, as we say, are an example of systems that can be in your favor, and it could be something you want to work with. Google News is an example where aggregation in that area may be driving traffic to your site, but aggregation in other areas may be systems either that you don't want to be associated with, or they're not driving traffic in your way, or they're using your content in a way that is out of line with your company interest and the perception you want people to have of your company. So, this is a very sort of big debate in the industry, and we, as Tom mentioned earlier, we've seen a lot of lawsuits with people trying to address this later later on after the event has already happened. But ideally you will catch that soon and you'll keep control of your content, because once it's out of your hands, it's very difficult to deal with that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Content scrape is probably one of the most challenging ones, certainly for you guys in this industry where your content is absolutely key. You absolutely want the right people to be able to get access to it, but as Andy said, we've seen time and time again people taking lawsuits out against businesses who are potentially profiteering from your content and your collateral and using it in the wrong way. So getting a hold and getting control over your content, absolutely key. And certainly one of the more interesting ones, because there's definitely pros and cons, and there's some content scrapers you absolutely do want and some that you maybe don't want at all. So one of the more interesting ones there is a bit more challenging for people.
Okay, so just moving on to the next example, which is account takeover attempts. And again, this is one of the ones that's fairly clear. There's something that you absolutely wouldn't want to happen in your site. And it's one that in some ways is a side effect from some of the attempts that people have made to keep more control over their content. So paywalls and things like that are put in place, or limits on the amount of content that people can access and the ability to take more control, which does lead to automated traffic trying to break through those account setups. And this could be either by the creation of fake accounts and the use of free trials, repeated use of free trials, or it could be by brute force attacking legitimate accounts to try and gain control, and then misuse the reason that account was taken, was created for. We've just put on here just an example from another site that we're looking at of how prevalent account takeovers are. As you can see, there's a fairly steady, almost constant stream of attempts going up constantly, almost matching sort of pattern of usage. So this is something that is just happening all the time, and they are, again, getting more and more sophisticated as the sort of simple methodologies that you can put in place to block them are becoming more common. The attackers are obviously moving forward as well to keep ahead of that.
Yeah, great. So thanks a lot for that, Andy. In terms of just looking at, what are the impacts now, a lot of the people we work with don't actually have sort of visibility in terms of what's going on their site. So the next sort of section of this webinar is really the goal is to show you what we're sort of seeing, give you some real sort of world insights into data that we found. So this is all data that we found from a number of different sites, quite a few media sites in here as well. So what are we actually seeing out there? And so Andy's now just going to talk you through some real world data that we're finding. It's hopefully going to be of interest to everyone.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So as Tom was saying, this is a range of data. It's not consistently from the same system. It's just to give you some examples of the sorts of thing we're seeing out there. So at the very top level, we're just starting with a little fairly simple graph of the split between human and non-human traffic. We would say that this is probably towards the higher end of the level of traffic we see. Typically between 15 and 60% of traffic on a site is what we would class as non-human traffic. So to break that down into a bit more detail, we've taken some of that same data, and really this is broken down by the hour of the day. And this just illustrates really that non-human traffic is something that is constantly hitting the site. There isn't a time where there is no non-human traffic hitting, and it isn't like there are just big spikes of non-human traffic. It's a constant problem, and when we get into some of the details around the impact, you can see it's not just happening when you're quiet. This is happening during peak time and non-peak. So just to go into this next slide, which is just to break down in a little bit more detail of the impact of non-human traffic on this system here. So we see this is a system where we've measured it over several days. On the left is all traffic, and on the right is what we would regard as legitimate human traffic. As you can see on the left, there are constant spikes. It's up and down. There doesn't seem to be any sort of real pattern around the usage. But when we get to the view on the right, it's what you'd probably regard as a standard usage pattern, where it peaks during the day and it's quieter at night. So as you can see, the non-human traffic really is having fairly major impact. And when we take this through to the next slide, we can see that as well as just the amount of hits that are being served by non-human traffic, it's the high cost areas of the site as well. So this is showing the impact of non-human traffic on the back-end processing time. So rather than just the hits, this is looking at the amount of time that the back-end system is having to spend processing those requests. And as we can see, the one on the right is all the human traffic. That is very, very low constantly. And on the left, it's got really big spikes, which just illustrates that the requests that non-human traffic is making are very, very high cost. It is hitting the most difficult areas of your site to serve. So just moving on to the next piece of data, which is where we started looking at the amount of crawler traffic that was hitting this particular system that we were monitoring at this point. And this is just illustrating that we've actually stripped from this data all search engine traffic, which is obviously the most common of the crawlers that we see out there. But this is just showing that there is a wide range of crawler traffic which is constantly hitting systems. And this is from every different color on here is a different type of crawler. It's not a different individual crawler. So we're getting, marketing crawlers on there fairly constantly. We've got scrapers on there, and we've got monitors on there. So there's a wide range of different crawler traffic which is hitting this site particularly. And this was actually a media site, and this is just illustrating that these crawlers are probably all trying to harvest content for use in other systems, whether that is for using marketing systems to determine, what the value of that content is, or using aggregation systems. This is a activity that is just going on constantly in media sites.
Yeah, and I think just interestingly on that point, Andy, I think one thing we have seen that I think everyone should be aware of, if we have seen a lot of sort of traffic out there sort of masquerading it as other traffic. So quite often we do see a lot of things that would say it's a Google crawler, when in fact it's coming from a non-Google server. It's not attached to Google, and it's carrying out activity that certainly doesn't look like the activity that should be carried out by a Google crawler. So it's very important to keep a real eye in terms of what things are doing. A lot of this malicious traffic that's out there, wherever it's coming from, is quite often sort of masked, and it can be very difficult to get to the bottom of what it's actually doing. So I wouldn't always believe that everything is exactly what it's tagged up to be. Okay, so I'll just, what we're going to do now is just cover off a little bit of the solutions that are on the market. So what is there out there that we're seeing a lot of people doing at the moment, and what is there that people what can be done to sort of take control over this non-human traffic that we're seeing?
Okay, so I think the first and most important aspect to this is that finding non-human traffic really is very difficult. There isn't a difference between a request made by a human and a non-human system. As we mentioned, all requests are ultimately triggered by a human in some way, and all requests are made by a non-human, because all requests are coming via a computer system. So they are exactly the same requests. So all we can do is look at methods where we can determine which of those requests is which.
Yeah, and I think just before you go any further on it, we are getting sort of towards, we said would be about 45 minutes to cover all the content. I think we're bang on track to deliver that. So if anyone has any questions that have been born out of what we've said already or what is coming up, please do feel free to put those questions in the question and answer box on the panel. We will be covering them very shortly. So yeah, do get your questions coming in now so we can make sure we cover them off at the end. Sorry, Andy.
Thanks, Tom. So yeah, as we were saying, what methods can we use to determine the differences? So the first one, and I think this is fairly commonly used one, is just look at static blocking methods. That could be IP addresses blocked on the firewall and your web application firewall. It could be looking at user agents and things like that. Now, the impact that will have will obviously vary from situation to situation and depend on the extent of your blacklist. I mean, the issue around this really is you do need to continually maintain that blacklist. It will be constantly new IP addresses and new user agents will be being used. The availability of IP addresses now is so widely and easily available that people can just move from place to place, sending new traffic towards you. So it's really important that you're constantly updating that list and that you're sharing data between multiple sources. There are industry blacklists available of known IP addresses, and obviously there are services available to augment that. And put some example data where in some situations this can block as little as 1%. In other situations we've seen it blocking sort of substantially more than that if you put the time and the effort into managing it. Okay, so the next way that we see people handling this really is rate limiting. So basically reduce the amount of stress caused by reducing the amount of content that you will serve to individual, could be IP addresses, it could be user agents, it could be ranges of IP addresses. And obviously this will have some impact. It will block traffic to scrapers that are requesting, making requests at a very high level, a very high level of frequency. So obviously we'll have some benefit. The risk you have with that is that you could be affecting the legitimate scraping activity of, traffic that is actually bringing value to your system. Could be affecting partners, and you could be affecting legitimate users because your more intelligent bots and non-human traffic will probably soon get around this limitation that you put in place, so you will end up affecting probably more legitimate users than you do bot traffic. Other prevention methods we see, particularly around ad fraud, is a range of client-side validations. So you see single pixel JavaScript validation being built into ads that display ads. And this, again, will have some benefit. This will detect some of the more obvious bot traffic. It will reduce the fraud that you see. And this is something that comes built into some of ad technology that's out there. Again, it's something that can be bypassed by more intelligent, more sophisticated bots. So it's one of these things that as soon as you put it in, people will be working to obviously bypass it. And as there's a lot of money involved in ad fraud, people have the time and the inclination to actually generate systems that can bypass this sort of thing. The other thing that we see people doing is building things into the application, again, to try and mitigate against non-human traffic. For example, setting account limits is one thing that we see. As we mentioned earlier, the side effect of that can be that it just leads to a fake account creation, and even worse, it can lead to account compromise and misuse, so legitimate users are having their accounts used by non-legitimate people. The side effects to this as well is that you do start to see things like abuse of the first click free functionality built into the likes of Google, and people abusing free trials, people creating accounts just for the free trials. The other thing you see sometimes is people putting captcha validations in there. Again, this will have some benefit in that it will reduce the amount of non-human traffic that's getting through your system. There are a couple of downsides. The first is that some captchas can be bypassed by non-human traffic, and that they tend to have negative impact on users. Users don't like it. It slows down the process, and they get generally dissatisfied with using systems that have captchas built in. And then the last way that we see people trying to get around this problem, which is the way that we would really recommend that you look at, is looking at more proactive traffic analysis, analysing the traffic before it hits your website, so you can block non-human traffic from even hitting your site and being able to request ads or generate content. But to do this, you need to look at more than just the individual requests. You do need to address the pattern and the nature of those requests that are being made. So you do need an intelligent data analysis and probably machine learning algorithms involved to make sure that you're correctly analysing that and looking for patterns that are non-standard and different from what you'd expect from legitimate users. Based on that, you can then start doing more adaptive approaches. You can do a combination of some of the traffic management and maybe some caching approaches that we've mentioned before. You can start dropping honeypot traps in there for anywhere you think may be unusable, non-human. You can drop in little bits of JavaScript that are dynamically created that humans wouldn't notice, but non-human traffic may struggle to handle. And you can use captcha then on a more restricted basis, so that you're only using it at the point where you're worried about non-human traffic.
Sure. So thanks a lot for that, guys. Just to let you know, we're about to go into the Q&A in a second. Andy's just going to summarise his thoughts. Just before we do that, I think just to make everyone aware of one thing we're doing with people in the industry is we are doing traffic audits. So a lot of the data you're seeing presented today is from us collecting information from various different sites around the globe and us running through that through our tool. If anyone does want to gain some visibility into exactly what's going on their websites, we do run these free audits to help give you that visibility in terms of how much of your traffic is non-human and what's it doing. So if you are interested in getting some data on your site specifically, like what you've seen today based on the account takeovers, the type of bots, how much of your traffic does it represent, do get in touch with us. We are running those, and yeah, there will be an offer for anyone to take us up on that free audit if they wish. So what I want to do is, if anyone's got any questions at this point, please do put them into the question box because we're about to answer those. We've got a few building up now. So yeah, we're about to go into questions. Just before we do that, I just want to pass back over to Andy just for a quick summary of what we've discussed today.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So I think just to summarise it, what we talked about today very quickly, I think what we can say is that non-human traffic is a problem within the media and publishing industry, and there's a wide range of issues that we see here. I think ad fraud is probably the biggest one that we see. There was massive loss of revenue from both sides, from both advertisers and publishers, and I think it's a constant source of dispute between the two sides, is agreeing legitimately how much of that advertising has been served and the benefit that people are getting from it. And from publishing, obviously your content is the most important thing to you. That's what you are building your business around. If someone is out there stealing that and using it in a way that you're not comfortable with or you're not in agreement with, that is obviously impacting what you do, and there will be financial as well as other impacts associated with that. But there's not a simple solution. As we've said, it's a range of good and bad bots. You've got to analyse what they're doing and whether, how you want to handle them, and you do need to understand not only the extent of the problem, but also the nature of what you're dealing with in order to be able to come up with an approach for dealing with that. There are some basic solutions that you can implement, some of which a lot of people have already implemented, others which you could easily look at, but they probably will have some limited impact. Sometimes you even see them having negative impact, particularly if you're looking at changing your user interaction, and putting things like capturing may negatively impact your user experience and therefore your site usage. Beyond that, you really need to be looking at more proactive learning solutions that are looking beyond just simple static analysis.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Andy. So yeah, I think the general summary from us there is that this is certainly a problem we're seeing. It's great to see so many people on today's webinar who are obviously interested in the problem from all around the globe and various different sort of subsectors of the digital media and publishing industry. Certainly a challenging area for everyone out there at the moment, and one that we think the absolute key is very first to get visibility over exactly what's going on your site before you then start to look at solutions that can help you manage and mitigate against that. So yeah, if anyone's got any questions, do keep them popping in. We've got a few here, so we'll go to a first one. Nigel, thanks a lot for your question. You were just asking, so what are honeypot traps? Appreciate we've been very sort of overarching in our discussion today. I think we could have done a webinar alone just on ad fraud if we'd wanted to, and could have filled 2 hours with that. So we have been very sort of high level in what we've discussed. So great question in terms of what are honeypot traps. Yeah, I'll pass over to you with that, Andy.
Yeah, so honeypot trap is, at its simplest level, it is dropping a piece of functionality into your system that a human will not be aware of, but a non-human may suffer with. So humans and non-humans generally work in a slightly different way, in that non-human interaction is usually predetermined what actions they will take, and they follow an expected route, whereas humans obviously react to what they see. So if a non-human interaction is being sent back something that is slightly different to what they expect, then they may not be able to deal with that. Obviously it depends on the sophistication of the bot that we're dealing with, but generally they have a set of responses that they expect and a way of dealing with that. as soon as you drop something in there that is non-standard, they may struggle with that. Whereas it probably, we can easily drop something into a site that a human will be completely unaware of, but it's operating in the background, and that it will hopefully not catch out the human, not even affect the human, but it will catch out more of the non-human traffic.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly a great area, honeypots. We've had a lot of success. We used honeypots to identify a botnet on one of our recent client audits, and that botnet was coming from 100 different IP addresses spread out across, but it was only hitting them sort of once every other day from a different machine, so really cycling around. So honeypots can be a great way to spot things like that. There's a lot of open source stuff out there about honeypots as well, so always encourage you to read around. There's a lot of things you can do as a sort of first step looking at honeypots. So they're a great thing that's out there, certainly something we're utilising. So great question. Thanks a lot for that, Nigel. Next question we've come in, just in terms of what are the signs of a bot problem? I think that's a really interesting question. What are the signs that someone's maybe got an issue? Andy, I don't know what you think about that. What are the typical things we'd expect to see on a website with a potential issue?
So, I think obviously there's a number of ways of looking at that, and I think you can look at it from both a technical or a system point of view, and also from a business point of view. So, from a systems point of view, if you start looking at your traffic patterns, as in the example that we were looking at earlier, where if you have unusual spikes or they don't follow the sort of pattern that you would expect from your known usage, and obviously it depends on when you expect to see your users, but typically you would expect your site to be quieter at night and busier maybe in the evening or during the day. As soon as you start to see spikes that don't follow that pattern, then that's probably an indication that something non-human is happening. And from a business point of view, if you're starting to see, big increases or very sudden increases in ad usage or page views, but you're not seeing the same or what you would expect in terms of conversion or anything like that, then you would generally expect that to follow a certain pattern. So as soon as you start to see unusual changes or non-standard variations in, if you're growing one area of advertising and you're not seeing those conversions or you're not seeing the responses that you expect, then that's probably again an indication of non-human traffic.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing we've seen, certainly, any kind of unexplainable changes in your analytics, unexplainable changes in errors that you're seeing on your website, because quite often, websites aren't designed for non-human traffic, so we quite often see, people having sort of strange errors they can't get to the bottom of, strange sort of changes in analytics, conversion rates dropping. But also I think for those of you, particularly in the digital media and publishing industry, we are speaking to a lot of people who are having their advertising partners and people who are running campaigns with them saying, we don't think this traffic's all been human, so we want a refund. So anyone doing that, any third parties letting you know about it, and certainly it's a very difficult conversation to have with them, so one that you really want to get to the bottom with a solid answer.
Yeah, I think another area is where you see very different responses to ads in different situations. So if you're putting the same sort of adverts out in multiple different areas, but you're seeing very, very different rates of response, then that's again something that may be an indication that something is going on there.
Okay, great. And we just got one other sort of question. What can we do? What's the easiest thing to do? Sort of first thing. Is it easy just to tackle this from a legal point of view?
So I think from my point of view, legal is a way of tackling this, but it is probably one, a very expensive and time-consuming way, and two, possibly too late by that point. It's certainly something that's worth pursuing to try and reduce the impact of this in the future and try and make it a more challenging problem for people. But from my point of view, I think it's better to tackle it at source and start looking at getting control over the traffic that's hitting your system. As I think, as with anything, when you're involved in a legal solution, you would rather the problem didn't happen in the first place and not have to resort to the legal outcome.
Okay, great. So we're just coming to the end of our questions now. I think just on that legal point, just I think an interesting one I've seen is certainly people making sure that the terms and conditions on the website and terms and conditions that they give to anyone having a membership or a free trial, you can get them really solid in terms of what people are allowed to do with your data. I think if anyone is looking at going down the legal route, the first point is to make sure that you have clear terms and conditions that people have to sign up to, that they're clearly breaking if they are doing anything illegal. So that's kind of a first bit of housekeeping that you can do, hopefully without too much expense before, if you do want to go down that route. However, we would advise really trying to tackle things head on, so it doesn't come to that point. So I think, the final question, I think was what can I do about if I think I have a bot problem? So what's an easy step for someone to do if they suspect this issue?
I would say first thing to do is just do some analysis. Whether obviously as we said earlier, we're offering a free bot audit on this subject. But the first step is to do some analysis and just determine whether or not you have got a problem, and from there you can determine what to do about it.
Great. Yeah. So absolutely. Yeah. I think getting to the bottom of it, running some analysis. Some stuff can be very easy to pick up. Certainly, the very sort of top of things can be spotted quite easily. It's then once we get into more complex stuff that I think things like our audits become really helpful. So thanks a lot for that question. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to draw everything to a close now. If anyone does have any final questions or wants to get in touch, you've got our contact details. We will be following up off the back of this webinar with some further information. So if anyone does have any questions or they want to take us up on the offer of a free audit, please do get in touch. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. Thanks a lot, Andy, for your input. It's been really good to have you on this webinar. And thanks everyone for your questions. It's been great to have you on this webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you all soon. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.